Good day everyone and welcome to my channel. This is my first live stream. My name is Cliff and we are just waiting for people to come on, so hopefully some people join and then we'll start. So hopefully you can hear me. This is my first time I've done it, so I'm a little bit unaware of how all this works. So if someone joins in and types out a message, I'll react. Hello Dakota Stones, hello. I can see you on my computer screen. I assume you're from Dakota in the USA. So what time is it there? About good. Hello, Isaac. A better name. Hello. Once we get a few people in, we'll start up. And if any of you people out there are facetors, just type in a few questions as I'm cutting, and I'll try to just answer your questions. Can everybody hear me okay? If someone can just type out a message, that will be wonderful. Hello, Happy. Hello, Ryan. Yep, you can hear me. Thank you. Okay, well, we've got a few people already. You've jumped in pretty quick. Is there any specific questions before we start that you'd like to ask? And then we'll get started and I'll explain what I'm doing. So does anyone have a faceting machine, or are you mainly interested in just gems in general? Okay, good question. So someone did ask a better name, nice account name. You asked what type of grit wheel I'm using at the moment. Now, I'm using 100 grit. Obviously, as you can see here, I've got a brand new stone dopped onto the quill, onto the dop stick within the quill, and it's Amethyst. And I do want to remove some material fairly quickly soon. And if all goes well, it won't come off the dop. So let me just look at some of these questions. Yes, Albion Draken. Yes, you've got a faceting machine, and I think you have faceted quite a few stones from memory. Okay, Lawley has one that hasn't set up. So I'm just reading some of these comments because there's a lot of them. Okay, what's the best stages of polishing? From Alexander. Well, I like to go through all my different topper laps first. So, for example, I'll start with my 100, then I'll drop down to a 600, then I'll move on to my 800 possibly, depending how this turns out, and then a 3000. But I'll be testing a copper lap, so maybe not today. We'll see how I go. Copper lap with a 3400 diamond paste polish, and then the final polish I like to always use is tin lap these days. I used to use a cerium oxide on a perspex lap, but these days I tend not to, mainly because of the swarf that gets dragged up underneath the facets when I'm polishing. So it can be, particularly on quartz-based materials, when you're using cerium, can really wreak havoc with a lot of the facets as polishing. Sometimes a little chip can come off the stone, it gets dragged underneath the facet, and it usually happens with cerium oxide. So we got Mark North from California. Hello, Mark. So we've got a few people in already. Now I'm going to start up any moment, and to let you know what I'm going to be doing, I'm faceting a design by George Beard, who is a well-known faceter in the Australian circles. I believe George is fully retired. He doesn't facet, and like most people, as you get older, it gets harder to see what you're doing. And with George, he is well known within the Victorian Facetors group. Now, if you want to download some of the designs from the Victorian Facetors group, you can just log in. You don't need to be a member, and you can download their PDF file. I'm working on what's called the Orbiter 10, and it's a fairly complex little design. So I'm hoping it may work out. You never just know, particularly with designs you've never cut before, but this is technically very difficult. So just look at Yes, Ryan. Yes, swarf from plastic. No, not swarf from the plastic. What happens? It's the swarf from the cerium oxide. The cerium starts to build up and it catches underneath the facet and it gets dragged onto the flat facet surface and then creates scratches. And because cerium is a lot more aggressive than, say, diamond, 50,000 diamond, it can occasionally chip out a piece of the quartz. And once that chip comes out, it'll float on the surface of the plastic polishing wheel and get dragged under the facet also, which is a real nightmare because once that gets dragged under, it will really severely scratch the facet and you cannot for the life of you get that scratch out because it's so deep. Okay, so we're going to get started. I'm going to find it hard to keep up with all these messages, so particularly when I'm faceting. So I'll just talk my way through it. I'm going to be faceting in increments of 8, starting with my index wheel on 96. And the way I like to do it, I like to go fairly aggressive on the start with the 100 grit disc. I'm just going to do basically a fast preform. Because the reason for that, I've preformed it a little bit, as you can see, but for me to spend half an hour just getting it perfect on the wheel, just holding it like this and grinding, I find that just too tiresome and it takes too long. And sometimes you'll get a more accurate, better preform, just sticking the gem onto the dop, gluing it on, and just working from there. Now, if you would have noticed from my last video when I faceted Cleopatra's Eye, I basically put the whole gem on the dop. Usually you find a gemstone that's a similar shape to what you're cutting and just work from there. Now, this is not the traditional method because sometimes I'm not too concerned about losing weight, particularly on synthetic stones. But to be quite honest, you don't get really great preforms on these type of laps. If you're doing cabbing and you're holding the gem up like this up against a wheel and going like that, you get really great preforms. But sort of, when you're at this angle, it's really hard to get terrific preforms, I find. And I don't have a cabbing machine. So let's get started. I'll be faceting the first couple indexes. So I'll be moving in increments of 8, starting with index 96, which I've already got set. I'll be running at a faster speed. Now, on my machine over here, there's a pulley and it has just basically 2 settings, fast and slow. So I can just lift the rubber belt up to a different level. So off we go. So I'll be running at fast speed. Now, hopefully you can hear me. So we'll see how we go. So machine's running as fast as it will go. When you're running your lap, particularly with a coarse grit, high toning, if you're running with a coarse grip, you want to be running quite a bit of water. So you want to get a fairly good water flow going. The reason why, because that'll eliminate more scratches. Being a 100 grit disc, they will scratch. This is a fairly worn 100 grit disc, and so it's not going to chip as much as a brand new one. If anyone starts off with a brand new 100 grit disc, and God forbid that you use a 60 or an 80 grit, it will really chip the gem. Hi, Renaissance Novice, how are you going? So, and Spiders for Space, hello. So be careful of using very coarse laps initially. They can really tear into a stone, and if you go too aggressive, you'll find as you move through the other discs, they're scratched it that much, and the scratch has gone that deeply that you really got to work off a lot of material with a 600 or an 800 grit disc. Anyway, let's go, and you'll see what I'm going to be doing. Over here is my height adjuster, so I can lock in I can lock that in so it doesn't move. So there's a little knob on the back here that locks in the protractor. I've got my protractor angle set at 45 degrees. So those are the initial facets, and then we'll start cutting. So I lock this in here. There's a little screw on the height adjuster. If you've got one of these machines, and I think they're similar to a Graves in the US, you want to be very careful that sometimes as you're faceting, hasn't happened recently, but you just hit the wrong screw, you unlock this, and then it happens to be this one down here you should have locked, it's one of those things. Okay, I'm going to start, and I'm all set to go. Now, this is a little tip for any of you new faceters. Here we have a spindle. Some spindles have a rubber cap on them, or they're totally just a rubber screwed spindle. When you start faceting, you want to make sure that your spindle, or your gem, sorry, does not touch the spindle. So before you start, or you got the motor running, just see if you can line it up. You will, if you lift your gem up, if it in that direction to straight above it. If you haven't set your machine up properly and you've brought your mast in too far from this side, you will chip your gem. So that's one of the first rookie mistakes. Set up so you don't hit that spindle. So you should be able to jump over it without touching it. See that? Okay, so we're going to get started. I'm going to start lowering and start cutting the first facet. Now, I'm going to be fairly quick and aggressive here. I'm just keeping even strokes. And what I'm doing, because I'm not using a depth gauge, I'm just listening till I get so it's not touching, a little tick-tick sound. So that's the first one. I'll keep going down lower because I've got a fair bit to grind off. Now you'll notice over here, I'm holding the gem, but over here, I'm pointing to my thumb. The reason why I've got my thumb there, watch, as I come over, my thumb will hit the side of the pan, which means I can't go over the edge. So a lot of people, when they're faceting, they go right over past the disc like that. And then as you come back in, obviously you're going to hit the side of the disc and chip. You don't want to be doing that. So I deliberately always hold my thumb like that so I can never go past the point of no return and beyond the edge of that disc. Hey, Caven, how are you going? So let's keep cracking on. Now that's no longer touching the surface, so I might try and spin that around. I don't know whether you can see that. So there's the flat of the facet there. So that's how much I've faceted, and it hasn't quite hit the center. So I'm just going to go a little bit deeper at this stage. So back on 96, and I'm going to lower. And the thing is, if you're not a commercial cutter, you don't need to go very fast. Just take your time. Hey, Caven, how are you going? Yes, you made in time. Now, it's not touching anymore, but I'll go a bit lower. So now, I reckon that's getting close to center. So I'm not using depth gauge, and I'm getting fairly close to the center. So then I'll move on to my next index, which will be index 8. Just got to find it. So we're going up in increments of 8. I like to do broad sweeps. Oh, hi, Diane. I'm getting on 6 years, but I've been involved in lapidary since I was a kid because my father was a cabber. So roughly 6, 7 years. But when I was a kid, I did a lot of cabbing with my father, and we used to do a lot of prospecting. So pretty much I've been involved in lapidary for, I don't know, 40-odd years, 45 years. But technically as a cutter, around 6 years. Now that's not touching anymore, so I'll go on to my next facet, which will be, we're going in increments of 8, so we'll go up to index 16. I'm going to go fairly fast now because got a fair bit to grind off. Next index 24. Now, I don't know how long this live stream will go for. I don't think I'll be doing a 3-hour one. Some of these live streams go on for 3-4 hours, and it's way too long. Now, I'm going pretty fast here. That if you can hear that lightly just grazing the surface. And you'll find actually when you're faceting, if your stone's not getting dragged anywhere, so if I'm not touching it, that means you're pretty much cut to depth, particularly on these coarse discs. So that's it. So I move on to the next index, which is 32, and so forth. Thanks, Geek Life. Now, reading some of the comments, and Jeppy, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. A lot of people are really interested in learning how to facet, and they collect gemstones. And the first question they ask, well, how do they get in the hobby? And it is a tricky one. I think if you can get into a gem club, that's always the best way. Get someone to teach you and show you. That's how I was taught. I was actually taught by, well, he's currently an Australian judge who judges gemstones, but he has been cutting gems in the high 90s for a long time. And that's to be a judge in Australia, you really have to be cutting beyond 90. So I was taught by him, very old school teaching. I was taught because he doesn't use a depth gauge either. So I only cut by ear and eye and feel alone. And to be honest, guys, I think I've always said it in my videos, depth gauges are a waste of time. I cut the Cleopatra's eye in the last video, all by eye and ear, no depth gauges. And incidentally, that had some wrong facet angles. So if anyone wants a PDF, they can email me in the About section on that video and I can send it to them. Okay, so let's get cracking. I'll just read some of these comments before I keep going. Oh, good question from Alexander Williams Gemstones. How long does it take to cut a gem that size? Now, how long is a string? I reckon for me, like off and on, probably about a week. I don't like fastening any longer than a couple of hours a day because, well, you know, when I come home from work, not that I've got work at the moment because of current situation in Australia, but 2 hours and, you know, I'll fluff around a bit, pat the dog, go and have a cup of coffee and stuff like that. But 2 hours, so you're probably looking at stone is big. I would say anywhere, 15 to 20 hours during a week. It all depends. If things go wrong, you can add another 2 or 3 hours or more. So I'll just read a few of these comments. Okay, good to know. Okay. Yeah, look, it's up to the person whether they use a depth gauge or any other type of LED readouts. I think personally, is there any point? The reason being, you've got to lower your. I'll just lock that in. You've got to lower your mask by this device here, which is, you know, your height adjuster. Sometimes you've got a height adjuster here on top. So if you're lowering it on most height adjusters, you actually got like increments of 1/10 of a mil. In my case, it's 1/20th of a mil. So when you do a full rotation, you've actually lowered it by 1 millimeter. So I don't even look at that. There's no point. I'm just cutting at the moment as I go along. But to me, this is really a depth gauge. So you can look at on the little on the side here, the notches, the readout, how far you've gone down, and you can use that. So I don't really see the point, but some people like to look at a depth gauge up here. I actually find that distracting because you want to be looking down here at your gem. You know, that's the most important thing. Okay, that's cut to depth, and as you can hear, once again, it's not touching. So we'll move on to the next index, which is index 40. Hello, Honic Blue. $48. What model is my machine? From Alexander. It's a facet star made in Melbourne, Australia. I believe in the early 80s. So they don't make them anymore. It was made by an engineer. Many of our faceting machines in Australia are basically made by engineering companies or people who have an interest in faceting, who are engineers. They're not really they're not really companies that are just dedicated to making faceting machines because they just want to make money. They're usually dedicated to making faceting machines because they have an interest in the hobby. So we keep moving on, and we're on to index. We've done 48, 56. Now on my on my index wheel, I've actually got it color coded that, but unfortunately for a lot of these facets, they're in between the color codes. Hello, Denise from Mexico. How are you? Index 64. Normally this will be done by now, the first Pavilion rough out, but I'm reading comments as I go along. Now, no, because I'm sweeping from here, from the outer edge here in, I want to keep as much even wear on my disc, and also you tend to get less scratching if you can keep the disc wear even. For example, right over here on the edge, it's going to be really coarse on this inner edge. So because you're not using that part of the wheel there at all, and particularly on this outer edge, the grit is really coarse. Obviously, you're not coming right up to the edge when you're grinding away. So those are areas that you have to try to avoid as much as possible if you want to get a smoother surface on any gem. And that would apply to a 600 grit lap or an 800 because you want to sort of keep it in that zone from here back to here. And that's part of the reason why I got my thumb positioned in a position where it's not going to be dragging back beyond that point there. Now, a lot of people, this is a question people ask about, reversing your discs. A lot of machines have got a reverse setting, so you can get the actual disc to rotate anti-clockwise. My machine only rotates in a clockwise. I don't have a reverse setting. A lot of Australian machines don't. But if you want to have a reverse setting on a machine that's just running clockwise, then you start from this section. I don't like cutting against the grain, but you can cut that way. So that means you're literally cutting in a reverse angle because of the rotation of the disc pushing back this way rather than it coming around as you're following the stream of the water going that way. Hang on, I've got to read. What does that say about my... Sorry. I've got a few questions here. What is my favourite stone to cut? From Diane, topaz. Topaz has been my number one gem. I haven't seemed to find it. I haven't found another gem that I like better. I do like spessartite, and zircon's really nice also. I think probably topaz, maybe zircon, and spessartite's nice. Sapphire is a really nice gem. In the times I've cut it, I found it problematic in terms that you get orange peel, which is not an easy thing to polish out. But not only that, you get certain facets on the certain surfaces on a sapphire where you're cutting and it's very hard, and all of a sudden it's like cutting through butter. And that is actually with synthetic sapphire also. It's the same thing. It's like you're hitting a cleavage plane and you're just cutting down so far to depth that you're actually overcutting. And it's something most faceters have with sapphire, that the sapphire is unpredictable by nature, as can topaz if you cut on the cleavage plane. Okay, Tesla. What are the negative impacts of cutting on the other side of the spindle grain, the other spindle? Okay, the negative impact is if you lower your mask too much, it will grip and then push up against the quill and push your faceting head this way. which is really bad. Not only that, I reckon you get a lot more chipping because you're cutting against the direction of the diamond grain. And that's actually something I'll mention. A lot of people say, how do you avoid chipping? And what happens as you get closer to some of your less coarse laps, most of us have a habit, if you're a faceter, doing this because you're trying to keep the surface wear as evenly as possible on your disc. But if you've got a chippy gem, which I reckon cubic zirconia is really chippy as a synthetic gem, what I try to do is avoid swiping like that. I will start to just keep it like that. Just do little. The reason being because the minute you start swiping across like that, you can get into this rough area accidentally, particularly on a culette. And culettes, anything that's pointy will chip. And not only that, you start, as you go across a bit more, you start actually getting closer to cutting against the grain of the diamond wheel, which forces the chip, of course. Hey, Ray, how you going, mate? Ray's been a long-time subscriber. So that's one way to avoid chipping. Hopefully that answers. Just a little, keep it, just little strokes in one spot. Okay, I'll keep continuing. And I've just noticed I've run out of water. Now, if you run out of water, what will happen? A lot of people, hang on, I'll just top this up. What will happen when you run out of water? Probably not a lot. It will chip more and get more scratches. And the gem can heat up, but I reckon that's not too likely. Hey, Chuck, how are you going? Now, that's one of the things that happens. You've got to keep an eye on your water. I'm too busy looking at comments. But, yeah, make sure your water vessel is full. So, index 72. Now, when you're faceting, I tend to be, like, I'm on a 100 grit lap, so you can be a bit more aggressive. But when I watch other faceters, they are so rough and heavy-handed. You know, that they're doing that stuff. And they're getting, particularly when you're getting up to polishing stages, you can hear so much noise coming off their polishing disc. And really, it shouldn't be. It should be a smooth sound you're getting as you're trying to float the polishing agent under the facet. You shouldn't be hearing like a grinding, too much grinding at all with polishing, except on the pre-polishing disc where they're a lot coarser. To answer Honic Blue, yes, I think getting personal instruction from a teacher is a great way to learn. That's how I got it. Joining a faceting group or a gem club is really a good way to start. Okay, I'm trying to answer some of these questions. So Geek Life, let's see. Geek Life. So is the speed experience lack of watching the gauge? Yes. Less watching of a gauge and more concentrating on the gem will increase your speed. Obviously, my speed isn't going too high at the moment because I'm talking and stopping. But I just don't see the point of looking at a depth gauge. I mean, it's no point to me. I mean, obviously, other people need it. But, you know, this is more of an old school way of cutting. They never use depth gauges. So I'll move on to the next facet, which should be index 80. And that's already done. That's right. So I've pretty much gone around, and I've just turned my machine off for a moment, and I'll just bring it down. I've gone around the entire gem. I don't think I've got the highest quality webcam, but anyway. So what I've done, I've gone right around. I just turned that off. So I've cut all the facets necessary, and I've gone right around in indexes of increments of 8. And so that's actually the first stage of cutting, which is your P1 facets, Pavilion 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, sometimes I would start to cut out the girdle. Now, this is actually a competition gem, but I'm not really going to treat it as a competition gem. I actually just love the design. The design, by the way, is called Orbiter 10. You can download it off Victorian Faceting Group website as a PDF, and there's a whole bunch of other gems also on that PDF if you want to have a go. So it's if you would have looked at the community tab, you can see the design on the crown, and it's got some really fascinating facets on it, particularly around the outer corners. Okay, let me answer a few questions out there for beginners. I would say no. You know what? All these books, I've got several of them myself. You know what? They all have the same information. I think it would be good to buy a book if you don't have a teacher. But what I found, it's all very similar information. I would actually go for particularly try to get some of the early books in the 60s, 70s, prior to LED readouts, and just when things were just a little bit more old school. Then, because a lot of people won't be able to afford say an Ultratech worth $10,000. I think they're about 10,000 US, the top-notch ones. And I know our VJ faceting machines, to get the LED readout, you're going to have to pay another $500, $600, $700 more just for the readout. And some people can't afford that. I certainly can't. So you will be forced only to have a very basic faceting machine, with just the head assembly, and nothing else really except the mast and your motor and obviously your tray and things. But most people will end up just with a very basic machine to start with. Just read a few more questions. I'll have a cup of coffee while I'm at it. What do you rank as at the moment? What do you mean, as a gem cutter? Well, I don't know. I never really thought about that. Well, I mean, I just enjoy cutting gems. I recently won a competition in one of the categories and received 98.5 out of 100. So, and the two other gems was 87.5 and 85.5 roughly out of 100. But to get anything beyond 95 out of 100 for any gem cutter is pretty high, exceptionally high standard in Australian judging. They are the judges in Australia. Each judge that assesses gems in Australia has to take on a special course. It's pretty grueling, to be honest, to become a faceting judge from what I've seen. I personally wouldn't want to do it for the time being. But from what I've seen, if you start getting beyond 95, you are pretty up there with some of the better cutters. And if you were consistently getting beyond 90, well, actually, the faceting judge at my gem club, he says if you're consistently getting above just 90 and beyond, you are right up there with the best of the best. Now, gee, it's pretty hard to do that, but some people do. It's not many. So, hey, Popo, glad that you could join me. So, I don't know. Like, I sort of rate myself as an intermediate cutter. I wouldn't call myself a master faceter. Jeff Graham would be probably a master faceter if you heard of him. But even master faceters, at the end of the day, they make mistakes. I mean, it's so easy, because things change so much from design to design. You can facet a design well, and you facet it 3-4 times, but then you move on to a totally different design you've never done in your life, and just everything starts to change because you just can't visualize sometimes what it's going to look like as you're cutting it. See, when I was faceting the last gem, Cleopatra's Eye. As I got further and further into the crown of the gem, I just completely started at one stage getting lost because of you get snow blind because of the more facets start to glare as you're looking through the loop, and it becomes more and more confusing. So what I did with that gem, rather than facet in an hour or two blocks, I would only do half an hour because just of pure concentration that just started to slowly diminish after half an hour. Okay, what am I? Renaissance. Okay, so good. I was just reading some of the comments, guys. Okay, yes. So Pepsi, if you want to have a look at the Victorian Facets group, you can just dive in there and see what's going on there. Okay, so I'm going to continue faceting. I'm struggling to keep up with some of the questions. So what I'm going to do now, I'll grab my other disc. I'm using 600 lap. Bring it over here. That's better. These are just Chinese laps. Actually, I'll use my other one. It's better. So these are these Chinese laps. They're just diamond topper laps. And they're very cheap. I usually buy them a pack of 4, anywhere between $25 to $35 Australian. That seems to change weekly, the prices, and they come from China. I found if you can get them sent by speed pack, some of the sellers sell them by speed pack. You literally got them within a week because of the postal service being so quick with the speed pack delivery. Look, I've had no issues with these. I've got these expensive chrysolite ones behind me, and they've been worn out. Some of those have been worn out in half the time of this, if not quicker. At some of them are about 10 times the price too. So with these laps, I've had no issues with the cheaper topper laps. Excuse me. But, you know, if you feel like, you know, you're going to get a better finish with the more expensive laps, by all means, I buy them. But I've had no issues. Occasionally, I've had the odd lap where I've had maybe there's been contamination, maybe what they've done on the surface here somewhere. They've so a bigger diamond particle has been, you know, impregnated into the lap, and then it just cuts across that lap and just scratches the surface of the facet no matter what. So I've had one that did that out of over 20 or 30 in the last 3 years or so or more. And, you know, when they get warm, these laps, I toss them. I don't bother, you know, scrubbing and clean and all that stuff. When I know they're warm, they're in the bin, and for $3 or $4 each, sometimes, you know, or more, $5, why bother holding on to them? Okay, I'm going to change out the lap. Now, this is a reverse fret on your machine. Now, a lot of machines don't have them, but what will happen if you do buy a machine with a reverse fret, people will spend half an hour, they can't unlock their spindle cap, and they wonder why, because it's a reverse fret. So if you ever get a new fastening machine, be aware of that. The reason why it's a reverse fret, because the wheel is spinning clockwise, and if it was spinning the other way, it would loosen. It would start to loosen that direction. Oddly enough, some companies don't have reverse frets on their shaft here, which is really interesting. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to sort of migrate to a 600 grit lap, and that will smooth out some of these Pavilion facets, and then I'll probably go to maybe an 800. We'll see what happens. I haven't tried the copper lap on quartz, so that will be interesting. See how I go. So let's have a go at trying this. Now, once again, nothing's altered over here. Just going to loosen it up, and we'll go to our first index again, 96. And technically, it shouldn't be touching at all now, because what's happened, I've just used a 100 grit lap. So that's a coarser grain. So you shouldn't have anything touching. So you're going to have to lower the mast till it touches. And I can just hear it touching now. So let's do it. Now, this is a good little tip for some of you guys who are starting out. sometimes I like to count. Like, for example, I'll lower and just go. So that's roughly 10 swipes. Then change to the next index. So index 8 and do the same. And I kind of don't count. I just sort of know. And that's it. And then move. So we go to index 16. Should have chosen an easier design. And actually I'm listening and I can barely hear that touching. So we're going to index 24. Now, what you will find on a lot of faceting machines, there is a low point. My low point tends to be around index 24. All faceting machines tend to have them. I don't know why. Some people have complained that their low point is index 48. And you will find that's pretty common in most machines. So I'll just go index 40. So that's an unusual index for me. Don't often hit index 40. I like to use a 64 index wheel because the notches are further spread out on the wheel. The less notches, the better off you'll be. So if you're faceting and you're always using a 96 index to facet a standard round brilliant, I would use my 64 index wheel any day of the week and just convert it. You can just use the same different wheels, but use different indexes. So at this point, I'm only listening. I'm not even really going to look at the gem too much. I haven't even got my optivisors on. I'm just looking roughly where I'm at with the center point because I can do a little bit more to get that right in a moment. I'll just see if I've got the right index 64. I'll just recheck that. Hey, Phil, how you going, mate? Yeah, he's off to work. Unfortunately, I'm out of work due to this pandemic. What a bugger. Right. Hello, True Herbsman. How are you going? Seattle. Weather still cold there in Seattle, True Herbsman? Well, should be starting to heat up a bit now. I've heard that in Chicago, but it's a very windy city. So it doesn't sound like the type of place I'd like to live in. I'm not into wind. Make sure I'll go back. I've missed one facet by the look of it, which is index 72. I'll recheck that. Index 80. Yeah, index 80. Too busy looking. Yep, that's got it. Now, this is not the ideal situation to be faceting in. Obviously, if you are cutting a gem, you're not going to be speaking to your wife or have your mates over, having a beer at the same time, or have your dog jumping on your lap every 5 minutes. You seriously probably want to be avoiding, too many people interfering with your faceting and things going on like that. You don't want any disruptions. It is one of those art forms. It takes literally a blink of an eye for things to go wrong, unfortunately, and full concentration is needed. So what I've done now, I'll turn off my machine. So basically, that's actually not bad. I've cut the first 16 odd facets, and we've used a 600 grit lap, and I'm getting a pretty smooth surface. So I should cut a little bit more down to a center point, I've noticed. So I might just cut in a little bit deeper on that 600 before I move on to an 800. And I was just going to say, thinking about as I'm faceting this, often I will facet after I've done this. I've done the actual 100 grit pavilion cutout. I'll move on to doing the girdle outline and then sometimes change back. But I found, and it might have been one of the Chucks, I was reading a post from him, and Chuck was saying that a lot of facetors like to facet in order. I think it was Chuck, by doing, say, for example, your P1 facets, you go all the way through to faceting to the final polish. So you get that entire section done and then move on to your other, say, girdle facets or whatever other facets have to do in that order. So you're going from 100 straight down to a final polish. And then when you do your next lot of facets, do the same. And I found that personally to be a little bit accurate. Normally, it depends on the type of gem. But I think if you're cutting a competition gem, you would probably like to do it that way. That's sort of, and for some reason, your facets tend to be more aligned. And look, if something happened, the only trouble is with that type of faceting, if you make a mistake during the polishing, as you get to, say, P3 or something, or P2, and you've done your girdle, well, then you're going to have to start all over again. It's a little bit tricky if you do make mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to just cut in a bit deeper because I know there's not quite a center point. I'm going to look through my loop. And yeah, there's a couple of facets that haven't hit the center point as good as they should. So I'm going to go back over it and see if I'm going to even out that center point. Now, as you would notice in all my videos, that I'm big on center point faceting. This Culet facet has to be perfectly centered opposed to the outer facets. So what you will need to do is grab your loop, look under your loop, and just check out whether you've got a nice clean center point. So each facet leading into the center point is even, and then the outer facets are also got a nice even spread. Now, if everything is perfectly done that way, you'll find all the other facets around it as you're building up towards your girdle outline should be perfect. That's in a perfect world. That's how I try to operate. If your center point is not quite centered, then all these other facets, particularly as you start building to the girdle outline, will be a little bit skew-if. And when you do the rotation, so you've done your secondary transfer, and that's when things start to get worse from then on, because you'll start building up to the table, and then your last couple table facets, which are often the star facets, will be totally out of line. And this is really critical to any gem having good meet points, getting that center point perfect. Some people don't worry about it. If you're a commercial faceter, you wouldn't bother. If I was a commercial faceter, I'd stop right now, move on, to be quite frank. That they wouldn't care. But because I'm a recreational faceter, I enjoy faceting for a hobby, then it does matter to me. And in Australia, we have a very high level of standard in faceting compared to a lot of other countries. See your Pepsi, bye. And yeah, we've always had, and that's why we're probably one of the international leaders in faceting competitions. We do host international competitions. We have more competitions per capita than the USA. So that shows you what a high standard we have, and it's always been that way traditionally for the last 50 odd years or more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually slow down the speed of my machine now. I had it going on fast, so I've done a preliminary P1 facets. I don't personally like going at a high speed. I like going at, say, a moderate speed with most of my cutting. The only high-speed cutting I do is when I'm just trying to rough out the gem. And I would suggest if you're faceting, and I found this myself, that when you're faceting, the best thing to do is have continuity. Now, my machine doesn't have a speed control. If you had a speed control on your faceting machine, I would say leave it at certain settings. When I was learning many years ago, I had a machine that had speed control, and then someone would touch it and it'd go faster or slower. And that is really bad because you're not used to, the consistency of the machine. And then all of a sudden you're cutting to depth way too quick, because someone's adjusted the speed by 100 RPMs, without you knowing. And that was when I was learning. But I would suggest, even if you've got a machine with a speed control, to start learning how to just leave it on, say, 2 or 3 settings that you're happy with. And don't go revving it up too fast and changing all the time, because everything's about consistency, I think, with faceting. That's why I always stick these days pretty much to the same method of polishing. I don't switch over too many polishing discs. Like for final polishes, it's always going to be a tin lap. I know its behavior. I'm learning how to use a copper lap for a pre-polish, because that's very old school. And you don't often see facetors using copper laps anymore, because we've got all these resin bonded laps, which actually cost a fortune. And every year there's some new lap available on the market, and I found all these wonder laps to be personally a waste of money, a big payout for not much of a reward. Oh, yes, Chuck, it was you who mentioned that faceting. Yes, I thought it was you. I must have read somewhere on a post somewhere. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Now, slow down my machine. I'm going back over these facets. I might even put my optivisors on in a minute. I actually don't use optivisors that much because I'm a person that cuts a little and looks a lot. Now, I'm just going to raise my mask because it's not touching. And I'm just going to drop it till I hear connecting with the lap. Now I'm going to go a bit slower now because I want these facets to be centered better. I'm kind of at this moment just listening. Now, when you're listening, one of the problems you'll find if you're that type of faceter, as you get to the final laps, it gets more about feel rather than listening to the facet touching the lap, because you can't hear it because of the nature of the fine diamond. I'm going to read some of these comments. Where do you buy your topper laps? I buy them off eBay. I look up just 150 millimeter 4-pack diamond laps, and it usually you get a whole list of sellers, and then I try to usually buy from the most reliable seller. I don't really, not too fussed if it costs $1 or $2 more. I'm looking for sellers that are reliable, with a good feedback rating. Now, what I've noticed, this is a really good question from RC Flyer. With these topper laps, sorry, I'm going to stop for a moment. This is really important, and I want you to know this. With these topper laps, they're great lap. Look, I've won competitions on them. Like if you're getting 98.5 on these cheap laps out of 100, they must be doing something okay. But what I've noticed, that there are a lot of sellers out there. They're buying these cheap laps for between $25 or $35 Australian, which is probably like $15 or $20 US these days with the conversion of the Aussie dollar against the greenback. And they're peeling off these inner, I'll grab one. They're peeling off these inner labels and then sticking their own badge on it. And then they're selling a $4 lap for $25. So I just want you to know that what some of these people do. And look, they've got a business to run, so these are usually more specialized gem dealers. But I would say just be a little bit careful, because you do want to save money as a faceter. Most of us are only doing this for a hobby, as an interest, as a recreation, and you want to be able to source out products at the right price, not at the big overpay. I'll just read a couple more questions, if there's any. Okay, looks like I've read out what I need to read out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is continue on, and I'm going to be starting using my loop a little bit more. So I'm going to be looping up, looking, and getting that center point right. If anything, if this machine has any little flaw, I would say the flaw in this machine would be that I think the index wheel is a little bit on the small side. I would love to have a bigger index wheel so I could see the numbers a lot better. In fact, I had to get a 96 index wheel made up by the engineer down the road, because this machine initially only came with a 64 and a 30 index wheel from memory. So I don't know what you do for 30. Just make squares, I guess, and rectangles. Someone asked, JC Woodbury, will you eventually show how GemCAD works? No, I don't use GemCAD, and I kind of actually have no interest in getting it. I actually personally think it's becoming superseded software. It really looks dated and old. It's almost got the look of a 98 software product, from Windows 98. That's real obsolete looking type of look about it. I'm using GemCut Studio. I'm no master at it, by the way. I'm still trying to work out quite a few things as I move along, because I've only had it for less than a year now. Just trying to check out what index I'm up to, 56. Now, one of the things I've noticed with some people with facet, they don't hold the stone. What I try to do, I'll just try to show you. Underneath, I've got my fingers, like, the ring finger and so forth. And I like to actually support underneath a little bit and hold, but I'm not really pushing on that stone. I'm just trying to, let the quill will do a lot of the work. This is quite a heavy quill, so it's just gravity is going to do something. But what I've noticed that certain machines, actually, this is a good point to talk about. Ultratech. Well, now the faceting, one of the head faceting judges, I'll turn this off. I wanted to mention that on certain machines they have a little handle, I think Ultratech, and then you hold it like this. And a lot of Australian gem cutters are saying that doesn't sound right. That's a flaw within the manufacturing process, because you should really be holding the gem. The gems do easily come off dopsticks, particularly as they get smaller. And obviously, when they're real small, they get real tricky to hold. But at some point, you really want to be able to feel what's going on through the gem up to through your quill, and you want to be supporting it. You're not using a lot of downward force at all. And I would suggest, if you can, this is one of the flaws I've noticed in a lot of machines, that some of these quill lengths are so short you can barely hold on. You can't get your hand on them. Now, I don't have a huge hand. I've got a medium-sized hand. But if you were a guy with a really extra large hand, or a woman, you would really, it would be just an absolute struggle just to, hold that quill properly. So I'd be a little bit careful with, if you're buying a machine, if you're stuck with a machine with a tiny quill, well, that's life. But if you're buying a machine, I would be looking at something with a little bit longer quill. Now, in Australia, if I can afford it, I'm not sure whether I can, the Gem Master is looking a really good proposition because it has a beautiful long quill. But in Australia, there are several machines. Mine's got a nice long quill, but the Halls 2000 and the Gem Masters have a really nice long quill. Now, the Halls 2000 is a machine that's superseded, but the new Gem Masters still have the same quill, and that's probably what any faceter should have. I have noticed on the Ultra Tech, they've got the new VL model. What a tiny quill, but it looks tiny, but it's exactly the same size as their upmarket machine by the look of it, except it doesn't have that little L-shaped holding handle. I find that really odd that for a high-end machine that, that you can't really get good purchase on the quill and you have to use that handle. I'll read a few questions and we'll move on, and we'll just see what other people have got to say. JC, sorry guys, I'm just looking at some of these comments. I'm often always in awe of faceting. Haven't done it. Okay. Well, a lot of people are, and it's sort of one of these hobbies that you rarely think about in life. And at the end of the day, I believe anyone can learn how to facet, to be honest. It's when you're not faceting, it's kind of a mystery. People think that you have to be really good at maths and know all these angles. What you kind of got to be good at is you've got to have the right temperament. I think that's probably the most important thing with faceting. You've got to be persistent. You've got to want to learn, but you've got to be persistent in learning it. But if you're a person that is you've got a temperament that you get easily angered or frustrated, particularly if you're a person who gets frustrated, well, it's probably not going to be the hobby for you, because it really does take a lot of concentration, and you want to be fairly in a relaxed mood when you're faceting. If something goes wrong, you don't want to have a little tantrum. You got to work through the situation. So it's really based on temperament and being patient. Yeah, exactly, Dirk. I was just thinking about that word. But to me, it's all about temperament, I think. If I'm not a commercial cutter, so like any hobby, you've got to enjoy it. So I think that's a huge point. If you enjoy what you're doing in whatever you do in life with these hobbies, then that will go a long way, to be quite frank. I do think the best gem cutters are the people who enjoy faceting and have the right temperament. They're patient. Something goes wrong, they just, work it out as best as they can. You don't want to have a wobbly or throw tantrum. I have heard of people, and obviously most people facet at home, but I've heard people that they're really flipped out when something's gone wrong. I shouldn't laugh, and they've taken the entire, they've just whacked the stone off it and they've given up. And you don't want to be in that situation. So that's the most important thing. I'll just read a few more comments and we'll keep moving on. Yep, faceting is very finicky. And that's, I think, the other aspect of faceting and personality. You've got to be a person who likes perfection in life. If you're not a person who's a perfectionist to a degree, then you're likely never to facet a great gem. You're likely to facet a good commercial gem, which are rubbish. If I say to people, don't buy them, because if you're buying your loved one a $20 gem from China or India, Sri Lanka, they are. You look at it, you don't even have to look at it under a loop, under magnification. All the facets are out of whack. No perfect meet points. They are cut so low in depth because they're always faceting for weight, and they look like just a clear piece of glass with a few angles cut on them, with a little bit of bounce of light, scintillation. That's not what you want. You want gems. Great gems are cut well, and usually they're cut well to depth. They have a fairly deep pavilion and a fairly high crown. And the reason being for that is that you have to cut at what's known as refractive angles, refractive index angles. And each gem, for example, like a piece of quartz, if you cut below the critical angle, then it will not refract, it will not emit light in the way it should. Most gems tend to have these lower refractive angles if you're buying at the lower end of the spectrum, because quartz has an RI of 1.54, something like that, which probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people. But basically, if you cut below the critical angle, which is, they say it's 41 degrees roughly, then if you cut, say, below 41 degrees on the protractor here, then it just will not emit or scintillate light. I actually like cutting around 43 degrees for any quartz, and this one's set at 45 initially, and it will not go any lower than 43 on this design. That's one of the reasons I'm faceting it. Okay, I'll just read some of these comments and I'll keep moving on. It's a lot of comments. I don't know how many, must have how many people. I don't know what it says. I don't know, probably over 200. I don't know. I'm not sure. Oh, no, we have 35 people logged in. So that's a fair few, actually. Just read some of these questions, scroll down. Okay, here's a good one from Dean. He's just starting out. Do you have any advice for someone starting out? Yeah, well, I probably mentioned this earlier. Go to a gem club. If you don't have a gem club, I would, and you've got a faceting machine, I would just start practicing, just get practice gems. Don't buy anything too expensive. Clear quartz is fine. The trouble with quartz, they are hard to polish. They are, in my opinion, they're the hardest of all the gems. And it's a shame. If you can get hold of topaz at a good price, I would learn on topaz. Not likely you're going to hit a cleavage plane. And if you do a little bit of research, you'll find it's easy to spot a cleavage plane in topaz. But I would try as a beginner learning on topaz, number one, because you're going to get the polish on it real quick. Number two, join a gem club. If you don't have an option to a gem club, you will need to buy a book, to be quite honest. And the other option is, whatever town you live in, if it's got a reasonable population, I would actually, no gem club, I would probably want to just advertise whether there is someone in town who's a faceter, whether they can give you initial 4 or 5 lessons quickly, even if you have to pay those people an hourly rate to come over, it probably would be worth it. Yeah, look, I mentioned, this is someone mentioned earlier on, what books do you recommend? I think they're all very similar. I would pick any book from the 60s or 70s, or 80s, a little bit more old school, something that's not using depth gauges. But personally, I think they all, from what I've read, they all start off with a standard round brilliant, and they all start off talking about preforming and then, going through all the little steps. I would pick any book. The less complex written, the better off you'll be when you're starting off. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on with this, and I'm going to have to refill the water. Now, I've got a little water jug next to me. Probably I would like a bigger water container because I do seem to go for a bit of water. Now, Where does my water go to? Well, there's a little tube on the back of my machine behind here that runs down to the back of my table, and I'm using a big watering can, one of those garden watering cans with a spout on it. It's a 10-litre one, so, it takes quite a while to fill up. And the reason why I've got a spout is because then I can easily pour it over my plants outside. Don't want to waste water in Australia. It's probably not a good thing at the moment. I'll just read a few more questions and we'll get pretty sure my facet machine is Facetron. It's packed away. Okay. Lawley. Yeah, well, Facetron. They look like a fairly easy to use machine, the Facetrons. I think they are one of America's premium machines, aren't they? Easy to get parts for, so you shouldn't really go wrong. So that would be an easy to use machine. They have a dial up here, your little winder for your mask and all that. So I don't think they'd be too hard to use. What would be difficult as a machine to use, I would say the handheld pieces where you're holding a type of a yoke and then the plate comes up and down. Now, those machines are hard to calibrate, I've heard. I'm not sure if anyone's using one of those machines with that type of handheld yoke and the plate rises up. They've got to turn. So it's got to turn the mask somewhere on the left-hand side to get them to lift up. I probably would avoid that. I reckon they'd be pretty hard to use, to be honest. Dirk says he's got a Hall Mark II. Well, they'd be a darn good machine, Dirk. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm trying to read some of these comments, but they're flying in. So I'll just continue on. Now, I've got to really concentrate because we're getting down to nitty-gritty of this center point here, and I don't want to mess it up. One of the things I find after all these years, the hardest thing is picking the wrong accidentally choosing the wrong index and then cutting the wrong angle. And I think we all do it. And depending on your index wheel, some index wheels are a lot better. And as I mentioned earlier, if anything about this machine I don't really like, I still haven't cut the center point. If anything I don't really like is the size of my index wheel. I think the Halls, that's some people mentioned they've got a Halls. That's an Aussie machine that has a really large index wheel. So you're less likely to, choose a wrong index. Now, if you're faceting, say, a gem like I'm faceting, I've got 1, 2. Actually, so I've got 12 facets. Sorry, I thought it was 16. But I've got 12 facets on the Pavilion. Now, there's another way of faceting the Pavilion. So you can cut to a center point by cutting just four facets, 4 opposing facets. So, for example, on a 96, you start cutting your 96 index. Then you rotate the wheel totally opposite to the other side. So that would bring you down to your 96 will be index 48. Cut the 48 index to a center point. Then go to your 24 index, cut that to a center point, followed by your 72. So basically you're cutting out 4 sides to a center point, and then you can cut all those surrounding facets in. Now, a lot of people do that. I tend to actually cut around, starting, say, from 96, move through 8, 16, 24, 32, so forth. It's different methods, but it gets the same job done. And the reason I like to cut around, excuse me, is because most faceting machines have a low point. And so as you cut around, you'll find out where your low point is on one of the indexes. And every other index will... That low point will be the designating facet for every other index around it. So for example, once you've found your low point on the facet, and you go around. Technically, you don't cut that low point any further once you've hit the center point. If someone's got a machine out there that's perfectly accurate, that has no low point, let me know, because I think you'll find most people do have a low point on one of the indexes. What will create a low point also is that when you're locking your dop, actually this is something I should explain, most quills have, like on the side here, they've got a grub screw. So when you're locking your dop, you're tightening in your dop, the grub screw pushes the quill over to one side, and that could create a low point also. In some ways, the best quills are the ones that have got the chuck assembly, like on a drill, you screw it tight. So by screwing it tight, then the dop is evenly centered. Okay, I'm reading some of these questions and trying to concentrate on my gem. Now, some people mentioned glue over wax. Now, I've never really used wax. I haven't at my gem club for cabs and that. And traditionally, all the people at my gem club who facet do not use wax. None of us do. I think we're not commercial cutters. Is there a reason to use wax when you're commercial cutting? Probably not, because you're not wanting to change out, your stone too often. Wax is messy. I've used wax a few times, and it can be messy. But no, look, I prefer using 2-part epoxy. Always used the 5-minute DevCon, but I always let it set overnight. Once again, continuity, as I was talking about earlier on, you find the glue that works, that you don't get detachments from gems popping off your dop stick. Stick to what works. I mean, it's no point in buying a glue but this gem is detaching all the time, and you keep using the same glue. Some people do this. I don't know why they do it, but find something that works. I like DevCon, and it's always worked. I've had one detachment in the last couple of years, and if anything will detach, believe me, it's cubic zirconia. Cubic zirconia has like a waxy finish. It feels waxy, and if you don't grind a rough surface on it when you're attaching your dop stick by glue, it just won't adhere like most other gems do. So I would be, thinking about consistency in glues. How many people use wax? I'm interested, because I was watching last night a stream by another gentleman. I've got to think, Justin Prim, and he was using wax. And I know he's a commercial gem cutter, I believe, but I don't know. I saw some odd things going on with gems falling off, and I don't know whether I could be bothered putting up with messing around with such a messy product. Yeah, Dirk says wax is good for speed, much more likely to detach, and you can also explode heat-sensitive stones. That's interesting. Thank you for that comment, Dirk. So something like fire opal would be a no-no with. Well, you wouldn't want to heat the stone up with wax, would you, on fire opal? Use a mirror facet. No. Don't know much about the mirror faceting system. Maybe you want to leave a comment and explain that to people, Chuck. Okay, I've got to keep moving, and I'll see how this pans out. I'm just going to check out the center point with my loop. Yeah. I'm going to cut down deeper on one of the facets. I'm going to find it and start from there. And start from index 48. Now, that's barely touching. I still want to create this perfect center point, and I'm going to go in a fair bit deeper, actually. I don't really need to cut to a, because I've got to cut in P2 facets, but I like to do it this way. I like to get it right from the start as best as I can. Yeah, so that's a lot better. I can see the center point coming in a bit closer in. I'm just feeling at the moment. Yeah, so you'll know I've actually using no pressure at all. I'm just trying to, because I'm 48 and 24 are critical facets on my machine. 24 tends to be a low point. So for some reason, those two facets I want to really get right. Just looking. So I'm actually instead of starting from 96, I've moved to the 48. So these are little mental details you need to keep in your mind as you're faceting. So I'll start from the 48 now and then just rotate through the indexes. So I'm going up to index 50 and I'm going to go a lot slower now. I'm just getting that center point worked out. Yeah, that's starting to look good now. One of the biggest issues you'll find as a faceter is too much downward pressure is controlling how hard you push down. Most people with facet push too hard, and if you push too hard on one of the facets as you're going around, for example, the pavilion, that means all the other facets around, it'll be lower, you'll be cutting in deeper, but that means on all the other facets, it's not going to be quite right. So once you cut down too deep and you haven't checked out the other facets, you're going to have little problems with accuracy. That's something I think we all have to learn. I mean, sometimes it's one of the things I still, I subconsciously have to keep thinking about pressure, not pressing down too hard. Now, if anyone wants to read a really good article by a US faceter, I believe Bob Keller is no longer alive. How sad. But I've read a few articles about his style of faceting, and he uses a Graves machine, which is probably not, recognized as one of the best faceting machines in the US. But he has won multiple competitions on a fairly ordinary machine, I would say. But he uses the same technique as I do. It's all about hearing for him and pressure, pressing down to meet points and things like that. Because every quill and this is a pretty solid quill, they all have a bit of flex in them. So he relies on those old school techniques. He has never used a depth gauge, and Bob Keller is up there with some of the best designers on the planet, gem cutters. I mean, he's up there with Jeff Graham. So when people start talking that type of language, cutting by ear and only by, feel and bit of sight, obviously you've got to use your eyes when you're looping up, then I'd be listening very carefully to those people. Hey, Joshua, how you going, mate? Good morning. Let's move on. The Graves Mark IV. Look, I know he uses the Graves. I'm not sure about your model numbers, but have a read of Bob Keller's, some of his posts on how he facets. I was really surprised myself when I heard about the graves. Actually, if someone could just write a few comments about what they think about the graves. I don't know much about them. They look like a very basic machine from what I've seen on photos on the internet, and I haven't seen anyone using one on YouTube. So if someone's got a link, pop in a link somewhere. I don't know where I've seen one being used yet. Let's move on to the next facet, which is index 72. Now, I could already feel on this index, number 72, that more material had to be removed, as I can still hear that it's lightly grinding. I'm going to look at that one. Yeah. Yeah, now I can feel that it's cut down the depth just by the feel, just by the weight of my quill and feel now and the sound. So that one's pretty much looks like it's hit the target. I have to admit, being the first live stream, that it's a lot harder to focus and concentrate. So I'm going to have to be really careful. It's not my usual routine of faceting. Okay. Well, someone must be asking about what I use as a lubricant. I use just tap water, nothing else. I think someone else said, no, I don't use distilled water. I don't. It's probably going to make no difference having distilled water. It's going to be, from my perspective, after faceting the last gem, the Cleopatra's Eye, really, I don't know whether I could ever surpass a better gem than it was. Just such a fantastic gem. If you haven't seen that video on the Cleopatra's Eye, I would suggest, if you don't want to watch all of it, go to the end. But I think that would be a very hard gem to top. I don't know. Has anyone faceted the Cleopatra's Eye? I'll just get rid of that off the screen. No, Dirk, you haven't? Well, if anyone wants the PDF, just email me. Go to the video where I facet the Cleopatra's Eye, and you'll see a link in the description. And just drop me a email, and I'll send it to you if you like. I mean, it's, to me, I'm not going to be publishing a book on how to facet the Cleopatra's Eye. That's one of the things also I've noticed, that there are various gem designers out there taking other people's designs. And look, this design, Cleopatra's Eye, is a Bob Keller design. Just because I tweaked several facets on it does not make it mine. It's Bob Keller's for a start. But there are people out there who are taking credit on designs that do not belong to them, and are starting to publish books based on other people's designs and just tweaking them. I think I really don't like that. It's bad taste. If anyone's listening or watching this video and you're doing that, please don't do it. It is like a breach of copyright. Give people their just rewards in life. If they've designed a beautiful gem and they've put in all that hard work to design, give them credit. Don't take their credit away from them and try to make out you've plagiarize their design, and yeah, I don't like it. It's I'm sure some of you people who are serious faceters have noticed that going on currently. Okay, I'm getting closer to getting a nice center point, but I'm still going to go around to index 8. Actually, index 96, sorry. And keep working it. Yeah, I'll tell you. Hello, Dean. I'll tell you what, there's going to be little chance of me getting into Queensland. I live in Victoria, Australia, and the borders are closed. We cannot do much about that, unfortunately. But I wish I was up in Queensland. I mean, you've got such fantastic gems there. Because I've got a bit of a, I don't know, forced stay at home, like many people, self-isolating, and currently out of work, I'm probably will be doing a few little field trips, taking my dog, Mr. Jaws, for a walk, and I might actually try and find some gems. I mean, they haven't stopped me from walking outside by myself with my dog, so that's okay. Life still can go on. Okay, we'll move on to next facet, and then I'll check out the center point, and then I might go to a finer grade disc. Just one moment. Yes, Dirk was saying it's a good hobby if you need to self-isolate. Okay, now Geek Life 778 mentions that, I just want to read this. Bob Keller, he used a Graves Mark 1, and they don't sell those now. So they're up to a Graves Mark 4. So how is a Graves considered as a machine? Is it considered to be a good reputable machine? I have no idea. I've never seen one in action. Excuse me. I'm going to have to look at all these comments later on when the video's over, because I'm missing quite a few of them. Now, I'm just going to stop for one moment. Now, I'm cutting down to depth. Now, I'm going to look at the evenness of the facet. Now, I'm not using optivisors at the moment. I'll just get the light the right way. Yeah, there's a few facets. Yeah. Now, this is a really, what you can do if you're a beginner, I won't bother, but I mean, where is it? These highlighter pens are really good value. A lot of beginner faceters, and I noticed when I was faceting the Cleopatra's Eye, you start to get lost in certain facets on certain tiers. Now, this can become your best friend. So in my case, I'll just give you an example. There's one facet I'm not really happy with, and I'm going to mark it, and I can already see now. I know where my 48 facet was, but I'll just, this one here, I'll just mark this. Don't know whether you can see it, but I've just marked one facet that's not cut down to depth properly. And if you're a beginner and you're not sure about where your facets are, you can actually color the entire surface of the pavilion or the crown. But, in this case, I just want to give an example. So I can just rotate it around, and obviously it's going to be index. It's the one before 48. So it's going to be index 40. And I'll choose that. And I can just see, what I'll do, I'll turn the machine on, and it'll slice through part of the gem. Okay. Don't know whether you can see it, but So it's cut through, but it quite hasn't hit the center point. So I've marked. So if you get lost on certain facets, you can see how it's erased that permanent texture mark or permanent pen mark. Now, for example, I might do that again. I'll just, to give you an example of pressure, I'll color that in, and I'll go down to, I won't adjust anything, and I'll go back to index 40. Now I've pressed a bit harder to cut down to that center point, but if I use just light pressure, you can see it. I don't know, it quite hasn't. This section here is still remaining ink. So I've sort of, by pressure, cut halfway. It's taken a little bit of material off, but I need to go down deeper. So I'll do that again, and I'll color some of that surrounding facets so you can see what's going on. Now, you could do this with your entire gem if you're a beginner and you're not sure where your facets are. You just color everything around. Boom, boom, boom. Running out of ink here. But to give you an example, you can do that, and I'll go back to index 40, which is not deep enough. Clearly, this would be probably done by now. I'm looking at the screen, and you can see exactly where I've cut. I reckon that's great if you're a beginner. Just see where you're at with your facets. So, you know, you can actually see, I can actually see when I'm looking close up that that facet has not cut down fully to depth. So it's just a little bit off, and there's another facet just next to it. So I'm going to do that one. And so we're up to, so I'm going to backpedal a bit and go back to index 16 because that hasn't hit quite a center point. And at this stage, now I'm not going to even lower this. A lot of people would, I'll pop that down. A lot of people go, oh, I haven't quite hit depth. So they start rotating their depth gauge, you know, to start lowering it. I don't really see the point because we're talking about maybe 1/10 of a mil, if that. And at this stage, on this facet, over on this side, I've got to cut it to a center point. It's just missing the mark by a fraction. So I'm going to just go back to index 16 and really just start cutting, putting a bit more pressure on that facet without lowering it. And I reckon that's almost hit the target just by doing that. Yep, and it kind of has, yep, which, so I've probably gone a little bit too hard, but that doesn't matter. So I just go to the index next to it. I can actually feel all these indexes. I haven't quite cut to depth anyway properly. Now I'm going to properly look under a loop. And I'm going to go a bit faster here. So I'm just using pressure. Time for more water. So at the moment, I'd notice there's a couple of facets not cut down to depth. And now I'm just using pressure to cut down to depth. Nothing else. Not lowering my mask at all. I'm actually not even using optivisors. I'm just looking, press, look. Now that's cut to depth. Then I'll go to my next index, which will be index 32. And look. Index 40 again. So we're going, just getting that center point all worked out beautifully. Now I'm starting to get somewhere. It's going to be, just doesn't take much to overcut. You probably notice now I'm only doing a couple swipes here or there. I'm just not doing much at all except just looking, constantly looking under the loop, getting a center point. So index 72 I'm up to. Well, actually, Dirk, I've got to tell you, mate, the odd thing about me is that I'm actually short-sighted, but my long side, well, I'm short-sighted, which means that I can't see in the distance. But for things close up, I have 20/20, if not better. For things, I got a pair of glasses, but I'm not even using them. But looking within, I can see close up like that with no glass, within a few inches, with no glasses, literally focusing. My mother had the same eyesight. She was in her 70s, still doing needlework, without any glasses, to be honest. But oddly enough, she couldn't see in the distance very well, which is one of the issues I have. I need glasses for driving. Oh, look, I do use optivisors. I kind of don't see the point. I think the last competition gem that got 98.5, I used no optivisors at all. My faceting mentor, gee, that makes me laugh. He won his first competition gem only using optivisors and no loop. And he thought, gee, this was pretty good. And I think he got like 80 out of 100, something around that mark. And he said, well, if optivisors are that good, he went up to the next level in gem cutting, and he used optivisors, but soon found out as it got more difficult that the optivisors, they're only a measure for just trying to cut the facet almost to meet point. They don't quite work getting in the fine details, but you can't really facet it. You can facet a commercial gem with optivisors, but anything beyond that, you probably have to give it away. I actually find optivisors sometimes a pain, because you got to loop up anyway, so you got to get your loop up to the stone like that, and your optivisors are sort of in your way. I don't know. I just don't use them as much as I used to. Okay, so I'm getting onto the next facet, which should be facet 80. And that's looking good. Facet 88, index 88, I should say. And then we're back to index 96, and we should be getting very close to the next stage. And one more facet, and you can see, you can see the last facet that I coloured in. And now I've hit pretty much a perfect centre point once that one's done. Well, as close to perfect as one can get at this stage. I quite haven't got there because I'll go down to another disc. So better not mess up. Make sure I've got the right index 8. And that index 8 still needs to be tweaked in a bit. Hasn't quite hit that center point. Pressing in a little bit harder, just using a flex of the quill. And that's pretty good. That's pretty close to the center point. So I'll just turn that off for a moment. So I don't know. Does anyone recommend a better webcam? I've got some older Microsoft one. So there we have, I might turn that around. Don't know if that helps. So there I've cut to almost, I think it's close to a very close perfect center point, which is what you try to aim for as a gem cutter when you're starting off your pavilion. And then what I'll do, I'll go down to a 800 grit disc. Now, 800 grit is a kind of unusual sort of grade for a topper lap, but they come in these 4-packs that I buy from China, and I reckon it's a great lap. What you'll find with your topper laps, always keep them as they get worn, because an 800 will soon behave like a 1200 or a 3000 lap. So you keep your old laps and you try to remember how worn they are and how they're sort of, they virtually become pre-polishing discs. So do that. Just having a sip of coffee here. Now, look, if you wanted to, I've gone from the 600 and I might find my 800. It'll start to smooth things out even more. Depending on how worn your 600 grit disc is, this one's actually fairly new. But if your 600 is pretty worn, you probably don't need to go to an 800. You can skip that phase. So we're on to the 800, and I'll go back. Actually, I'm going to mark this out again. It might help. You can visually see what's going on. I'm going to mark out the entire pavilion with the highlighter pen. Normally I don't do this, but it might actually be good for you guys to see what's going on, because if you're a beginner or you're trying to learn, this is probably not a bad method. That's how I kind of was taught by my first instructor, using highlighter pens, because you literally do know what in the first, I would say the first 3 to 4 months, you kind of, when you start faceting, you don't really know what's going on. You're cutting at angles, but really it kind of, it's very confusing. And maybe if you were an engineer, you really would be good. You've got a good understanding of angles and degrees and all that sort of stuff. But so what's that? So I'm just reading comments. What's off? I don't know what's off topic. So yeah, so I've lost concentration. So yeah, in the first couple of months, you may need to use highlighter pens. So I'll go back. I might actually start from index 48, as that was the facet that seemed to be at the depth I liked to start all my other facets. Now, look, I'm not going to really be doing a lot with this 800. That has just grazed the surface, and it's probably going to be all I got to do, a couple of swipes. Okay, I'll just have a look under the loop and smoothed it out a bit. Oh, yeah, it's done a good job. I think I'm going to just go quickly through the 800 and do 2 swipes on each facet, and then I'll check out where the center point is. So 48, I'll travel on to, where am I at? 56, sorry, concentration. Using no pressure, just gliding softly over the surface. You'd be surprised how fast things can go from now on with finishing the pavilion, because once everything's aligned with the facets, it goes a lot quicker. Most faceters do not like the initial grinding. So I'm up to index 80. Right, now that's done with an 800. I don't know if it made it any better for light. Light can be a bit glary. So that's done with 800, and what I'll do, I'll just check the center point. I'm going to look with my loop and just see if they're all centered properly. Okay, they're pretty good. There's one I would definitely push in a little bit deeper, which is index 72. So I'm just going to lightly press in that a bit more, and that should do it. Okay, so that's done with the 800 grit lap. Then I'm actually going to test out this copper lap. I haven't tried it on quartz, but it's been working pretty well on all my other gems that I've done from cubic zirconia and the various other gems I've done in the last month. I just got to grab that. It's behind me. So at this stage, I won't need any more water, so I might just turn that off and remove it, because I'm going to do a pre-polish with a copper lap. So I'm going to wipe down any water or spillage on the master lap. Now, those people who buy these master laps as a secondary option, I'm not sure why you do, because most machines have a master lap already. That is your master lap, and then they buy another master lap, place that on top of the original master lap, and I kind of wonder why. What is the point? And what happens if you keep adding, say, different master laps on and different gauge topper laps and all that? That means you're going to have to keep raising or lowering this assembly all the time to adjust for the different heights of the laps. And that's not a great thing in life, to be quite honest. It just takes forever to get a stone cut if you've got to do that many change-ups and lifting up of the mast. I'll just read a few comments. Yes, it is a distraction, but look, that's what these live streams are about. You do need to read occasionally what people write. Okay, so we're going on to copper lap now. Look, to be honest, I've only recently, in the last couple of months, been using these, and I've been finding these laps for pre-polish to be something else. Now, I have no idea. This is a new experience for me. I had not used one on a quartz-based material. So if anyone's got a suggestion before I start, I'll look at the comments. But I'm going to just see how I go. And this is part of learning about faceting. You cannot know everything in life about faceting. Do I clean my stones between grits? Yes. I usually hold. This is a clean piece of paper here, but yeah, usually I do actually. Just for the demonstration. It's probably never the best thing to wipe your stones with your finger, but what I'm going to be doing is actually cleaning this disc, and I will clean the stone, because you should actually, once you start getting the pre-polish stage and polishing, you want to be using paper to wipe your stones down, and you're going to have to, because you end up getting a bit of grease on the stones. Now, this copper lap is not a solid one. It's got a backing. Now, you'll notice on the back, I've written down 5 micron. It's actually 5 micron, and I only ever use this lap with 5 micron paste. It's got some on there, and I'm going to wipe that clean. Don't go using different laps for different polishing compounds. So if this is a 5 micron lap, that's going to remain a 5 micron lap forever and a day. You do not want to be, say, using any other coarser grade on this lap, because what will happen, it'll impregnate into the copper surface, and when you go to do other types of pre-polishing, you'll get contamination with, and it'll just scratch and gem. It's one of those things in life you have to put up with. The other thing is, I do have what I like to do is have a damp cloth near me, so I can just wipe any gunk off my hands or dirt. I'm going to do that now. And you kind of never see that in the videos because there's lots of things in the background. When you go handling gems, you really don't want to have diamond dust and particles on your hand. So that what happens, this cloth, after a little while, you wash it, and it gets rinsed out quite occasionally during the process. So I'll rinse that out in half an hour or so and just clean off whatever's on there, or get a fresh cloth. Really important, contamination is your worst nightmare with cutting gems. And if you are fussy about the way your gems look and you're a recreational faceter, you do need to keep your area clean. I mean, this is one of the things I've seen with so many faceters, that everything around them is just filthy. Like before I started this process, I've actually taken off my faceting mask. I've gone and cleaned my, the mask with some lubricants. And if you want to know what type of lubricant it is, I've forgotten the name, and I'll tell you what I use. Hang on. Sorry about that, but I thought I would mention this because this is all part of, I guess people wanting to learn. Talking about cleaning, I use liquid paraffin to clean my mask. Every time I start a new gem, this head assembly just lifts off, comes totally off. I'll take that off and I'll clean the mask with liquid paraffin, and I'll clean the inside of my height adjuster, and I'll also clean the inside of the the head assembly. So everything is running smooth. A lot of gem cutters will not go through this process. If you want to keep your mask in tip-top order, you kind of got to be pretty clean. And look, you don't want to end up with diamond dust and particles on that mask, else everything's going to start grinding, and you'll wear out your faceting machine in no time at all. Going back to being clean, having clean habits. One of the reasons I have this on my tabletop here, I have this big plastic cover. And so before I start any gem, everything gets wiped down of contamination. Really important to clean your area, your tabletops. You clean the base of your machine. I started afresh with a clean pan. So my previous stone was cubic zirconia. I cut that, so you got a lot of cubic zirconia grindings in there from the previous cut. You don't want to leave all the debris in your pan, particularly from harder materials. If that gets dragged onto your disc as you're polishing or pre-polishing, all you're going to do is just drag contamination on the surface, and you're going to get scratches, and that means extra work and things like that. So have clean habits. Unfortunately, some YouTubers don't have very clean habits, and it's almost something they would have been taught from day one. I know from my mentor that he was right on to me about being clean, and I try to do that. I mean, and even having clean habits around your faceting machine, you'll still get contamination. So you're trying to eliminate the odds. Now, what I'm going to do, I don't like using too much of this stuff indoors, but how do I say it? A lot of people say they use different type of things that are, like, for example, like glass cleaners and other products. A lot of people use glass cleaners. I don't think it works. I think the WD-40 is probably the only thing that really cleans a tin lap properly, and copper laps. I don't know. I've tried several other products. I've used glass cleaner. So I'm just going to spray a bit of that on and clean my lap. Now, what I'm going to suggest, if you're using WD-40, I would suggest that after you use it and clean your disc, these little tissues you use, I like to wrap them, put them in a plastic bag and seal it, particularly if you're working indoors. Now, you're going to get gunk. Now, see that black gunk? And you get a lot of this on tin laps. I find once your tin lap or even the copper lap starts getting black, I find that starts to scratch. Sometimes you can actually use it to your ability when you're cutting a really hard stone, maybe like cubic zirconia. Sometimes it just cuts through it better. But I tend to find that with softer gems, once your disc starts getting too black, I'd start cleaning it, to be quite honest. So I'm going to just clean this and just see how this pre-polish pans out on copper. So I'll do a little bit more. Now I actually will be grabbing a plastic bag and I'll be disposing those in a sealed bag because I found if you use this stuff indoors, this WD-40, and you're just throwing your tissues in a bin next to you, you're going to start coughing and the whole room will get fumy in no time at all. So I'll just get a bag and toss those in a bag. Okay, let's carry on. So I've disposed of that. If anyone else can suggest what else they use apart from WD-40, someone bonsai brother. What do you use? Lanolin. Yep. Okay, so there must be the other products that are less smelly and toxic. I don't know. I'm not sure. It seems that most people are using WD-40. So I'm going to go into this pre-polish and I'll show you what I'm using. This is a 5-micron diamond paste. Actually, you can get this on eBay. It's called THK, and I found it to be pretty good. I've actually ordered a larger capsule. You can get it in larger quantities, obviously, to save money. So yeah, look, I've used Metho, Dirk, and I reckon it doesn't work that well either. To be honest, I've used methylated spirits. For those people in the US, Metho is denatured alcohol. And just, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to cut the mustard in terms of cleaning, to be quite honest. So that's my opinion. I reckon it doesn't get all that black residue off the tin laps. So with this, you just use a little bit. I'd probably over prime it, to be honest. But what I'm trying to do with this diamond paste is basically try to get it spread into the copper, let it impregnate a bit, and that will really happen when the stone is pre-polishing and it's rubbing against the surface. Now, this is what you kind of don't see in the videos behind the scenes. You'll notice that I've got a bit of diamond paste on my finger, and this is where I'll use this rag here, and it gets wiped off. Really, see, I don't want to be touching my quill with diamond paste and getting contamination as you get closer to a polishing stage. I'll read some of these comments. Paul. Oh, how do you dress your tin and lucite laps? Actually, this is a topic now, I don't know, it's a little bit controversial, dressing copper tin laps. You know, they've got all sorts of methods to dress your lap. I don't bother. I like, to be quite honest, I like to have a perfectly smooth lap as possible, particularly with tin. With the tin laps, they're very soft, and there are people who score them and do all sorts of wonderful things. And for me, I like the smoothest surfaces possible. And once the tin lap gets a little bit worn, they tend to groove out, because with all laps, particularly the softer laps, they start to, cone in slightly on the surface, because you're really working this area of the lap out. Very little is getting done around the inner rim or the outer rim, so it starts to dish out a bit. And then you'll notice it gets a bit harder to polish, because you're starting to get surface areas where it's not quite connecting onto the facet. So I take it down to my local engineer. He just shaves a bit off it for me, makes it as smooth as possible. In terms of copper laps, look, I'm no expert with a copper lap, but my mentor, Aussie guy called Peter, faceting judge for FLACA, which is our ruling body in Australia for all the heavyweight competitions we do and such. Well, he uses a solid top copper lap, and his is as smooth as a baby's butt. It's not scored, and even he says he can never understand why people are doing all these scoring methods. They got using corundum and all sorts of things. And so I'm not. Yeah, that's a good question. I do not score my laps, and I know with Perspex, a lot of people score those with a Stanley knife. And in some ways, it does. I think it does work. That's to prevent that swarf from catching underneath the gem. But no, I don't scour or do anything to my laps. I like them smooth as. So I'm going to go back to index 48. I'm just going to test this, see where I'm at. Yeah, I can see it rubbing, but I think I'll just lift the mask up on this. I'm going to have to lift it up because the height of the disc is different than the topper laps. Now, at this stage, what I'll do, I'll zero in my height adjuster. So on my height adjuster, it's got little readouts. I'll start from 0, and then I'll just start to lower it. And this is where I'm going to just wipe that surface down. So I'm just using little bits of paper, but I'm going to just see where that connects on the facet, because the surface is greasy. And you can buy these THK diamond pastes. Now I can see, now that's a difference. I can see that the grease is touching the top half of the gem. So what that means, I don't mind that really, because what will happen, I'll be cutting, I can just lower the mask and it'll cut down to the girdle outline, which I haven't quite done. So that's actually connecting pretty good. So I'll just start off and see whether we can get a pre-polish on it. This is my first attempt on, it's first attempt on a copper lap, and it's really working well, I can tell you now. I'll just have a look at my loop. Now, these 5 micron pastes are aggressive, so you're actually taking off material. Just got to be a little bit careful. So that's working. I don't want to go too much more, to be honest, because it's actually cutting away material. So I'll just work around and check my center point. And then I probably actually might start polishing these surfaces. One moment. Yep, index 56. Now, I'm not going to adjust my mask at all. Once again, just using pressure. I don't know whether you can see, but that's pre-polishing the surface. I'll see if I can hold it up for you so you can see it. Now, this is a great time. I don't know whether if it's come up clear. I've done 2 facets of pre-polish, and it's worked pretty well. I tell you, I'm really impressed with these copper laps. I want to read some of these comments. You can really clean copper laps with Hoppy's number 9 for cleaning gun barrels. Oh, yeah. That's an American product. I've never heard of that. So I'm going to continue. Now, this is a good time to check out how these facets are aligning on the pre-polish. That's 56 index. I'm going to just cut in a bit deeper. I might just lower it a little bit. There you go. Now, I can give you a little clue that when you start going around the pavilion and you're going through all the indexes, a lot of people start lowering their height adjuster, so to accommodate for trying to cut into a center point. So they're lowering down, and I've got to tell you, that is a really bad thing to do, because as you go through the full cycle of the facets, that what will happen, you'll end up staircasing. So you're better off to keep it as it is. Look at your settings. So I've got mine a bit past 1 on my dial, and start pressing in with pressure. It's one of those things people say, how do you stop staircasing? Well, you stop it by not messing around with your height adjuster too much as you're forming girdle outlines and forming facets on your pavilion to center point. And a lot of people don't realize it, because as you keep lowering, you're dropping down the facet angle. You're better off to use a bit of pressure, to be quite honest. So I'm going to keep working on this center point. So I'm at index 64. Now, good. What I should do, because you're not using any water, you can take out your splash guard if you want, because probably will get in the way with some people, because you're not using water, so you're not splashing water everywhere. So what I'm really working on now, I'm just getting that center point done, just pressing in so it's all nice and even, getting even facets. Because even at the pre-polish stage, what I'm doing now, whether you're using a 3000 topper lap or whether you're using these diamond pastes on copper, you still need to be focused on even facets if you can. But if you're just cutting as a commercial cutter, you wouldn't bother, would you? Really, I wouldn't even bother. I'd look under. I wouldn't even look at a loop at the moment, to be honest. But I am. Now, clearly, I would easily be finished by now. But yapping and looking at this screen has slowed things right down. So it's really important. Cut a little, look a lot. Now I'm using this to wipe down, because you do get a little bit of grease residue as you're cutting. A lot of people say that cutting is the incorrect term, and they're probably right. It should be probably more classified as grinding a gemstone, because you're technically not slicing, are you, or cutting? But I guess it's one of those things, with different words have similar meanings, but not quite right. Yes, you got to have OCD disorder when you're faceting. I tell you, you got to. It's such an art form that requires constant repetition. It's actually one of the few art forms, maybe apart from sculpturing, it's a diminishing, subtractive art form, most art forms, you're building onto something or layering. For example, you're painting, so you're building onto a surface. With faceting, it's a subtractive art form because you actually got to remove material, remove something to create something, which is one of the art forms. It's totally the opposite. I think sculpturing is the same. You've got to remove material to create something. Now, I just want to check. It's really important to check. Now, you can use the outer surface like I'm doing now, because there'll be a higher concentration of diamond paste there too, because I haven't used it much. Now, once I've gone right around, which I'm getting closer, that's when I'll lower the mask a little bit more and just do one more rotation and see how I go. But I'm pretty happy how things are going, to be honest. As I mentioned in the community tab, this is actually designed from a competition, but I just like the design, and I doubt that I'll probably, unless it's going to be a spectacular gem, but I'm not sure whether I'll enter it into the competition. If you're doing competition gems, you probably don't want them to be that big at this stage. Most of the cutters will cut down to the required size, which at the moment is 8 millimeters, but a lot of competition gems are 6 millimeters in diameter, and there's no competition competitor would, in the right mind, cut a huge, massive stone, because the work and the polishing effort to get it right would be just quite immense, to be quite honest. You wouldn't bother. And it's probably, I'm getting around to, gee, that's coming up okay, I think. I've just got to choose the right index now. Because what happens as you do pre-polishes and polishes, as you get closer on the rotation, you're looking through the gem, and it gets harder to see what index you've got to pre-polish sometimes, unless it's really quite rough from the previous disc you use. But it's getting a bit harder to see through this gem what facet, and because I'm not concentrating like I normally do, I've got to make sure I don't make a mistake. Now, I started on 48, so I've got to go back. I'll go back to 32. And then I'll go back to the previous one. Now, so I did see a comment earlier on that people have a lot of trouble with polishing. And that's always been the Achilles heel of any gem cutter, polishing. And you can read all the books in the world, and you could probably have all the help in the world with someone showing you. But at the end of the day, I think with polishing, it's a lot of experimentation. You're going to have to work out some sort of polishing regime that works for you. Now, the polishing can depend on many factors: how fast this is running, what polishing agents you're using, what type of laps you're using. I actually find that speed has a lot to do with polishing, working out, within the situation. I don't ever like running my lap too fast. In point of fact, some people even polish at a really low speed. I would not recommend that at a high speed. So it's a combination of speed, the amount sometimes you use of compounds. You can buy really bad compounds. I've noticed a while ago, this was about 6 months ago, I bought a 50,000 grit diamond compound that was supposed to be De Beers, and it was just absolute junk. And it come from a reputable source. It's not like it came from an unreliable source. So things can change up with polishing. I usually find if you want to learn how to polish, start with topaz. It polishes. I've polished it on plastic, on perspex. You can polish it on tin, copper. I know it polishes on copper because guys at my faceting club, they polish on copper. But it can be tricky on quartz. Some polishers don't like it. Most people polish with cerium on quartz, and I've actually prefer not to these days. But I used to. If you look at some of my videos a few years ago, cerium was an option I used. One of the things you'll find with cerium is that the facets aren't as sharp, and you can actually tell the difference between the sharpness of the facets when you're using cerium on perspex, and particularly those people who are using those ultra spectra laps. So you can tell the difference. And if you decide you want to enter in a competition, I'd probably be avoiding cerium, because any faceting judge worth their salt will notice within a heartbeat when the facets aren't sharp enough. If you were doing high-end faceting for people and doing commission jobs, you'd definitely probably want to be using probably tin or something a bit better to sharpen those facets up, so they're getting a quality finish. Now, there's one facet that I think it needs to be cut a bit deeper, for it's not much. It's a 72. So what I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to press a little bit harder, and I'm going to probably cut more to the outer edge like that, to cut into depth, because it's higher on the rim usually, because that's where there's hardly any wear, and that has cut it into a pretty good center point. And there's one more facet I've noticed opposite. Yeah, so no, it's not quite right. So it's a 48 facet, 48 index. Okay, so we have pretty much completed up to the pre-polish stage of the pavilion, and then I might move on to the polish, and that probably will do me, because I'm not going to cut out the girdle today. I think we've done a fairly long enough session. Can't believe it's been 2 hours, and I said it'd be a short one. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the polishing and discuss what polishing methods I use. What I'll do first is clean this out first and pop it away. Right. And then I'll clean my hands. So this is where I become a little bit more fastidious, because I'm moving on to a tin lap. I don't want to have dirty hands with this diamond grit and stuff on it. So I'll be cleaning my hands momentarily. I'll be right back. So what I've done, I've gone quickly to the bathroom. I've cleaned my hands, and there's a very good reason for that, because I'm going to be polishing these facets on a tin lap. And because I was using that 5 micron diamond paste in the pre-polish, I do not want to be touching any part of his surface with that particular diamond paste. So really important to do these little steps. Sure, it takes a little bit more time, but you'll be saving time when you're not dealing with trying to get rid of these massive scratches because of contamination. See you, Dirk. So I'm going to polish 1 or 2 facets, and then I'll finish up, and I'll explain how I polish the facets. Quartz is not, in my opinion, the easiest product to polish. A lot of people struggle because, for whatever reason, quartz is that type of gem. And unfortunately, when we learn, we're all learning how to polish on quartz. So I think if you could learn to polish quartz, you could probably actually polish anything from then on. I actually find some of the synthetic gems a little bit difficult to polish. Anyway, let's get onto this polishing. So clean your hands, and I'll give the polishing disc, the tin disc, a little bit of a clean up too for a moment. Generally, I use toilet paper, like little sheets of toilet paper for cleaning up, but I'll tell you what, that's becoming short supply at the moment in Australia. I don't know how it's going for people overseas, the toilet paper scenario, where there seems to be a mass shortage of it, people hoarding it. So I'm just using these napkins. Now, this thing about using like these napkins or toilet paper, you want to be you don't want cross contamination either. So what you'll be doing pretty much is just wiping a few facets here and there and throwing it away. So make sure that your polishing lap is clean. So it's not a lot on there. That's actually pretty good. So because I cleaned it before I put it away, but any black residue, try to get rid of. And that'll be good enough. So this is really important, guys, because obviously the tin lap is a lot higher than the copper lap or the topper laps. You really don't want to be going into the polishing, just dropping it down, because that's at a totally different height. It's not going to be anywhere near where the plane is on this facet. So you're going to have to raise your mast up and just adjust. So you obviously set it to the index you want to polish first. And at this time, once again, I'll zero in my height adjuster. I guess if you've got one on top, you probably have to zero it in up here. I think with certain machines, some of them to lower, you have to turn clockwise. Others, you have to turn anti-clockwise. Actually, it's very odd that you would want to lower turning anti-clockwise, but that's the way some machines are set up. So that's not touching. I'm only about 0.5 mil off from the surface of that of the tin lap. And what I'll do now, when I'm polishing quartz, and I know I've polished on a tin lap, I'm going to use some of this Herco Valve Oil. I buy this in music shops. I use it on trumpets to keep the valves on trumpets nicely lubricated, and the clarinets, so they don't stick up when they're pressing in the keys. So I use that, and what I find, it seems to be, it dries out and it's not as greasy as, say, sewing machine oil or the snake oils and all that. So mostly on quartz material, I like to use it. It seems to be slightly more aggressive with a 50,000 diamond compound. So what I'm doing, I've just added 4 or 5 drops, and then I just lightly just rub it into the surface. And what I'll do now, I'll find some diamond paste. Now, basically, just put your finger over the top, give it a bit of a shake, and it'll get, part of it will adhere, and just put it in. So I think that'll be enough for the time being. I'll just check out whether it polishes the surface. I'm hoping it will. It usually does. So then you just get it lightly rubbed in. Now, this is where I start cleaning my fingers. I'll pick up another cloth. This is part of the thing. You don't see this on the videos, but I clearly got dirt on there, and I've got my wet rag, and I've actually turned it inside out. So I'll just wipe my finger, and that will see that you won't ever see in the video. So hopefully this has helped you out. So get rid of that old piece of napkin, and for cleaning the surface I'll be using this one from now on. Okay, and then just fold it accordingly. So what I've got to do now, obviously we're not touching the surface. Now I'm going to just gently lower it onto the surface, and because it's got a greasy mark, it should tell you exactly whether you're getting good contact. But actually I can see that's pretty much on the mark already. If the faceting head or the angle is not quite right, you'd see the grease either on the bottom or on the top where the cooler is, and then you're going to have to make an adjustment on your protractor, just lifting it or raising it up accordingly. Now that's one of the things when you're faceting and you're cutting really difficult designs, you really want to become the master of learning how to make little fine adjustments on your protractor. Now I've got a little fine adjustment screw here where my finger is, and that will just lift the angle slightly or lower it. A lot of people, just cut, they look at their design, they cut to depth. Whatever this design schematic says, they will just simply cut down and hope for the best. When you are faceting complex designs, you will need to float in facets, which means that according to the design, the angle is not going to be perfect as you make a meet point. So at that point, you've got to sort of work out how far you're going to make these little fine adjustments. And sometimes when you're doing that, you'll have to raise this up, this assembly, and then come down again, raising, lowering according to the angle. So you're floating in the facet. You're not just relying on what the design says. So now I've made good contact. I'll lightly touch it again, and I'll polish that facet. And that is as smooth as a baby's butt as I'm rubbing it, to be quite honest. I want to go across the whole surface. Just you don't go aggressively. You're going, just taking your time, and hopefully you're getting it pretty clean. Now I've noticed that I'll get my proper loop. Now this is a big facet. I'd probably tweak it a little bit to. It's always the center part of the facet. Like if you're polishing a table, you always get a little white patch, and those little white patches are usually in the center of a very large facet, and they can be difficult to remove, particularly on a huge table. Now what will happen with this particular oil, this Herco valve oil, is that it will slowly dry out, and during that drying out process it will start to bite a little bit. It'll get a bit stickier, and when that does that, that's when the real magic starts to happen. I'm going to just raise that up a bit because it starts to get stickier as it dries out, and starts to really bite into those white patches that you're trying to facet. And I'm getting a really nice polish on this, to be honest. Got to just tweak it slightly to the right, just very tiny little tweak. So over here is my cheater, this little knob here, and I'll rotate it, anti-clockwise to bring it to the right, clockwise this way to bring it this way, in this direction, you will, polishing is, in my opinion, I love polishing. It's the best part of faceting. A lot of people hate it, but I think I find that just the grinding of facets to get to the point where you're polishing a paint, just all that time you spend just trying to get to the shape of the gem is just a pain. But for me, that surface is, I'll turn this off, that's already polished. I don't know, it's not a great, I do not have a good camera, but that's got a beautiful finish on it. And then I'll move on to my next facet. So that's working out pretty good. So I'll continue on to the next facet, and that might be the last one I polish, and then I might get people to ask some questions and I might answer it. Really hard to keep up with what's going on with all these comments. I apologize if I haven't answered everything, but hopefully, I've answered a lot of your questions. So let's get back to doing the next facet. Now, once again, so because I've polished index 96, I've come down, and I've noticed this has dried up a bit. What I want to do, I'll go to my next facet, but which is index 8. I'm not going to go straight into it and just go turn on the machine and polish. I'm going to just assess things quickly. It won't take long. And I've noticed that I've got to add a little bit more valve oil because the surface has dried up. So I'll add a little bit more of that. So I'm just going to add a few more drops. I don't want it too oily or too wet, so about 3 to 4 drops, and just lightly just move that around because there's still plenty of diamond on there. And once again, clean, get that gunk off your fingers, and wet cloth, try clean. So once I've finished with this cloth, I'll clean this will be all cleaned out, and I'll start with a fresh cloth once I've done the final polish. Okay, so I'm going to just rub that lightly on the surface, and I can see it's making a pretty good connection. Actually, at point, I've just got to go a little bit right, not much. So just see how I go. But you just don't want to dive into, you don't want to throw your stone straight in without testing the waters. Now, I'll just go gently. Now, at this stage, you can lower the mask, raise it or lower it slightly, because we're trying to polish the surface and look at where it's making contact. So actually, I did go a little bit too much to the right. So I've got to go a little bit left. So that's polished the right side. I don't know if you can even see it. But it's basically what's happened. It's polished the right side of this facet here. So what I've got to do is just tweak it to the left a little bit. Now, what will happen with a lot of beginners, and this is really one of the things you kind of don't notice when you're looking closely at a gem, but you do get on large facets what they call ghost facets. So you're polishing one part of the facet, but you're not polishing the entire surface, because for some reason people really struggle to get a really good connection between the facet and the surface of the lap. So it's purely flat, and so it's polishing a little bit off center on the facet. So then they try to do a cheat. So they've polished a bit too long on the right hand side of the facet, then they cheat to the left, and it kind of looks like you've got the whole facet perfectly polished. But then if you really look close up with a loop, you'll find that you've got what's called a ghost facet, like two little, you actually faceted another facet on the surface of that polished surface, and you can actually see where the facets, sort of split. Hard to find, particularly on smaller facets, but you really want to avoid ghost facets. I knew when I was learning first that was one of my issues, ghost facets. I don't have that anymore, because what I was kind of doing, sometimes I would start polishing from the top, from the culette, and as you wind down, you can just wind down to the base and polish it. But sometimes if it was a little bit off center and I did that, you get these little ghost facets too. Is any if you faceters out there, let me know if you found ghost facets to be a pain. I'll have a sip of coffee and then I'll look at some of these comments. Bonsai, what about you? Have you ever had issues with ghost facets when you first started learning? Oh yeah. So Dean's having trouble with ghost facets. Look, I got to tell you, it's a learning experience in itself. I have secondhand. Well, look, Dirk says he has secondhand gear and get them all the time. And I reckon that, to me, I reckon most faceters would really struggle to get true polished facets on large facets, that is. Yeah, Bonzo says, not really. I've just made really fine adjustments. Yep. You don't get, I find with ghost facets, on tiny facets, it's not an issue. It's the really large ones. And that's probably why you're paying big bucks for big gems, because there's so much more work that has to get put into the gem, I find. You can cut a tiny 4 millimeter, 3 millimeter gem within a day, really. When you get to these, once they start getting over 10 mil, it really cranks up the work hours and the amount of time you have to put into polishing. Okay, so let's work on this second facet, and then I'll sign out slowly. I'll read a few comments and we'll see how we go. So we're on to index 8. Now I just want to make sure. Yeah, that's good. Trouble polishing because you've been using your lap for quite a while, because you get a bit of dishing out in this area here, right? Sorry, this area. And you'll find if you can't get the surface quite, you can just work on this area here where it's a lot flatter and a little bit higher up, and you may get better contact. I would not recommend, I'll just look at this facet, but personally, I would not recommend that you go in opposite direction. I'll show you what I mean. So a lot of gem codes say if you're having trouble polishing, then polish, that way against, the grain, I guess. I hate that. I mean, it can lead. You tell you what, if you want to destroy a tin lap, is dig into the surface of the tin and lower the mask at the same time, because the whole faceting head assembly will just dig into it, and it'll just force because of that anti-clockwise rotation. And I actually like to always facet more on the trailing edge, so because that avoids the gem digging into the lap. So see how I'm working the trailing edge rather than working in a leading edge? Bad news. That's my opinion. But some people love to work on that leading edge rather than the trailing edge, and I think it leads to a million headaches. Now I'll just keep working on this. Look, with the larger gems and you've got large facets, it can take hours sometimes if things don't go right. And quite often, the more you overwork the facet, the more headaches you end up getting involved in, because you're actually not making the meat points. You've overcut even on polishing. You've got to be very careful to get it right. So I'm actually going to raise that just a little bit. With these little fine adjustments, every faceting machine is different. The more you use your faceting machine, the better you'll get at making these fine adjustments. You'll get to know your machine you'll get to know your machine, all the little idiosyncratic things that can go wrong with them. Now I'm finding just probably don't need to worry too much, but just on the Coolette, it hasn't quite polished. And the reason why I probably just have to raise it. Now, because I've raised it a bit, that means you're going to get a little ghost facet. So get that. I'm just going to lightly polish out that Coolette, which I probably don't have to worry too much because I'm actually going to be cutting through that later. That looks better. And because I've raised it marginally, that means I'm going to just lower marginally again. Once again, you can look at all your settings on your height adjuster, so you know exactly where you're at. Yeah, that looks really good. Sorry, I'm using a loop. When you're looking through the loop, you keep both eyes open and just look through with the eye through the loop. You don't want to be squinting. Some people squint, they're closing one eye, and that's not what you want to be doing. Still got a little bit on the top, but I'm probably not too worried about that. Yeah, that should get it. Yep, that's got it. Okay, well, that's that facet polished. I've noticed my belt's getting looser too, so I'm going to have to deal with that later. Okay, so that is that there. I don't know whether it's getting a great, but I polished those two facets, and I'm not sure whether I can get closer up. Might be able to get closer, and I'll bring that around. Yeah, so that's done. So that will be all for the live YouTube video we're doing, and I'll answer a few questions if people want to ask any questions, and then I'll sign out. Hopefully you've learned something from this live YouTube stream. I'm not sure whether you have, but for me it's a lot more difficult faceting like this than just doing it by myself and concentrating. So I'll look at some of the comments and I'll answer anything. So Dean, appreciate heaps educated. Okay, thank you, Dean. Okay, what's his question? As Paul Hernandez, how do you do dotted angle instructions on the machine? Dotted angle instructions, I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe you want to, I'm not quite sure. Are you talking like 48.1, 48.2 degrees? So we've got angles of 1/10 of a degree. Oh yeah, so yeah, 45.6. Okay. So you're talking about angles of 1/10 and 1/100. Well, my machine doesn't have a vernier on it, so I can look at the actual protractor. I'll just spin it around so you can see. So it'll have obviously angles. So for example, 50 degrees or 40 degrees on the protractor. And then it'll have, say, you can see there's like 1 millimeter between each degree. So what I do is just do roughly, say, 50.5 degrees. And I can see that. I'll look through my loop and then I'll use this fine, it's a little fine adjuster here. And I can rotate that clockwise or anti-clockwise accordingly. So, and I make little adjustments on that. I don't have, because I don't have the 1/10 adjustment, that's when I start using pressure and cutting into the meet point. Like, so basically, if I want to go, say 40, if I've got, say, set of 50, and I want to go to 50.1, I'll probably set it just before the 50 and use a bit of pressure. Because by using pressure, that pushes the angle down lower. So I can come down and just push a little bit harder to cut into that meet point. But when it comes to 1/100th of a degrees, I know that a lot of designs have 41.12 or 41.16. And that you're talking about 1/100th of a degree. To be quite honest, you are kidding yourself that any faceting machine can cut, particularly top of laps, to that sort of accuracy. You're kidding yourself. Just moving from a 600 down to an 800, just the surface of the lap would be more than 100th of the degree you're cutting off because of the coarseness of the diamond. I know there are claims out there that people are cutting at 1/10 degrees, like you can cut an entire pavilion at 1/10. I think you'd have to polish those in, to be honest. If it's not possible. But if you're really concerned about 100th of a degree, which I think is pretty incredible that you could do that on any machine, and think your machine's going to do it, I think you're kidding yourself, particularly if you've got one of those LED readouts. It's just not possible. One light touch too heavy, you'd be cutting beyond that. You'd be cutting 2 or 300ths of a degree off just by pressing marginally. So what I suggest is not to be too worried about that stuff. Just try to cut by pressure. Okay, so I'll just see if there's any more questions and then we'll sign out. Okay, well, thanks, Jeanette. I hope everyone had a good time. Hopefully I could explain things okay. Okay, see you, Laurie. Mohammed, thank you. Okay, and Dirk, I concur. The VJ, I don't know what that means. Must be some sort of cross-reference within the conversation. So any questions, I'll try to answer. Oh, where is your amethyst from? Actually, got it from one of my subscribers. He sent it to me from Brazil. So happy. I mean, I didn't want to mention his name. He asked me not to mention his name on any videos, but one of my subscribers sent me this piece. So when I'm completed, I'll send him a link of the video. And Brazil seems to be overloaded with citrine and amethyst and gems in Australia. They have such a vast variety of gems that we don't have. Of course, we do have amethyst, but a lot of our amethyst we have is really water worn or weather worn. Just traditionally, a lot of our gems, because of the age, the geological age of this nation or this continent, a lot of gems tend to be really included, weathered, just aged. It's just the way things are here. We have beautiful sapphires, but if you have a look at some of the channels, for example, Tim's channel, half the sapphires are, all duds, and they're just so worn and weathered. And for every 100 he finds, there's 1 or 2 that are really high quality. And pretty much when I go prospecting, for every 10 pieces of smoky quartz you pick up out of a riverbed, there's 1 that might be really good for faceting. Whereas in Brazil, they just seem to dig it out in the tons there. So I'll just look at these questions and have a look what's here. Oh, how do you find the best angles for the best use of light properties? Look, I keep it really simple. That was a question by Paul. If I'm not sure about the critical angle of a gem, I just have it's a pretty old book, and it goes through a list of all the critical angles. I know for anything that's quartz, I do not like to cut too far below 43 degrees. I know that the scientific critical angle is way lower. It's sort of getting around 41. I find if you cut quartz around 41, it just doesn't have enough scintillation. Even topaz, I like cutting around 42, maybe a bit more. So I kind of know those off by heart, but if I was to facet a gem I hadn't done before, like, for example, damberite, I've got a piece of that, I'd probably look up the critical angle, which I suspected would be 1.5 something. I actually, no, I haven't cut damberite. Sorry, I've cut something else I'm thinking about. So damberite I haven't cut. I would suspect, actually I have to look, but I'm suspecting it to have a very low critical angle. no, it's a low refractive index like 1.5. So I would still probably facet that at 43 degrees. Actually, for quartz, I'd be going more around and Danbrite 43.1. By the time you did the polish, you'd be getting very close to 43, and that would take it to its optimal angle. Fire opal, look, fire opal I've faceted before. Yeah, you'd have to probably facet at a higher angle. I don't know. Look, to me, fire opal is an odd one. It doesn't really scintillate, to be quite honest. I've done it 2 times now, and regardless of the design, you don't get a lot out of fire opal. It's a type of gem you're faceting just for appeal and for the color, because some of the colors are very fluoro-like. For example, the African fire opal is really intense fluoro yellow, and I know some of the orange fire opals are getting almost to that fluorescent fluoro look. And so you're really faceting for a particular color. And some of those gems are probably in some ways better a cabbing gem. But I do have noticed that in Australia there was a source of that red fire opal found in Western Australia, and they've been very tight-lipped about it. So fire opal is one I would just facet for color and design purposes. So you pick out a design you like the shape of. I don't think you're going to get much scintillation out of those type of gems, and that would go for rose quartz. Every time I faceted rose quartz, because you've got that milky hue within the gem. Yeah, look, you're just faceting maybe just for a bit of color and for design. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions. I'd like to thank everything. Yeah, Jason says, sorry, fire opal's good when cabbed, and I'd agree with that. I'd like to thank all my subscribers, because I'm going to be heading off. It's a pretty long live stream. I thought it'd only go for an hour. So I'll be heading off, and I wish everyone the best wherever you live. Take care of yourselves. We live in a different world at the moment compared to a month or so ago. So until next time, and I do another stream, hopefully you drop in for that. So it's goodbye for now, and take care, everyone. I'm going to be signing out. I'll see you later, everyone. Bye.